Mr. Speaker, I'm very pleased to speak on the Advanced Technology Institute bill. Can I also start by acknowledging the late Sir Paul Callaghan? He was a great man. He did have great vision for New Zealand, and this legislation is actually about delivering on that vision. But firstly, can I just take a moment to comment on the wider economic agenda and the theatrics that we just had from I believe it is David Cunliffe, but I think it is interesting that he is filling in for the actual research and innovation spokesperson who's been very quiet on this bill, the leader of the Labour Party, David Shearer. Perhaps this is a very ominous sign. Perhaps this actually, my colleague says Ian Shearer, perhaps the real truth is that we just heard the leadership speech of the Labour Party from David Cunliffe. But can I say, Mr. Speaker, that everything that we just heard from David Cunliffe is rhetoric. Whenever it comes to many economic initiatives, and we heard Weta, when it comes to the Hobbit films, will they support these initiatives? No, they vote it down. When it comes to greater intensification, they vote it down. When it comes to mineral exploration, they vote it down. And what has been very interesting through this process, through this legislative process, is to see a very clear comparison between the parties. We are a party that is supporting a framework to enable businesses to get more ideas to market quicker. This bill was supported by a range of parties across the House, but the key thing is, and we saw it in the Labour Party minority reports, they talk the talk, but when it comes to the actual detail, we see them looking after their mates. And we saw this with them advocating for union seats on the Advanced Technology Institute bill. That is extraordinary. Their major economic solution for New Zealand is to hold up our commercialisation vehicle with union seats, Mr. Speaker. It was a very collaborative process, this bill, and there were many great changes as a result of the Select Committee. But can I say, Mr. Speaker, that when it came to the crunch, when we saw their true colours in the minority reports, we saw a party that is outdated, and back in the 90s we saw a party that is absolutely beholden by the unions. We saw a party that is committed to legislating for everything. And what I'm confident of is whether it's the fact that we've increased science funding by 17%, whether it's the fact that we've made major investments in infrastructure, whether it's the fact that we're delivering a crucial piece of legislation that is going to ensure that we have greater collaboration between our scientists and our businesses, we are actually delivering, and we have a plan, and we are investing in that plan by 17% of additional science funding. And you compare that to the Labour Party, who is very clear that they want to legislate for their union mates, that they want to stop everything else from happening, whether it's other areas of our economy, from mineral exploration to intensification in terms of farming, to labour laws, all of these things which add up to having a much more flexible economic agenda that is actually focused on growth and jobs. And I think we need to mention that, because we constantly hear the rhetoric, but we don't see the detail that will actually take New Zealand forward. And this bill, we have had a range of submissions that were incredibly supportive. I think there were 23, 7 oral submissions. Can I also acknowledge that in terms of the changes that were made to the bill, we strengthened clauses around collaboration. I want to thank KiwiNet for their submissions on that. I also want to acknowledge other members of the committee, such as Tracy Martin, David Clendon and Megan Woods, and other members of the Labour Party, because I think it was an incredibly collaborative process, and under very tight timeframes we achieved a lot in making some very valuable changes to this bill, whether it was the collaboration clauses, whether it was ensuring that there was consultation with the wider sector. I think it's a very good piece of legislation, and it's part of our wider economic agenda, which involves not only greater investment in science, which we've delivered on, not only ensuring that we have very good economic policy in terms of our labour laws, also ensuring that we have greater collaboration via vehicles like this. But $166 million, Mr. Speaker, is an extraordinary amount to ensure that we have high-tech centres right across New Zealand, particularly in Auckland and in Canterbury. And I'm very confident that through the Select Committee process, we have delivered a vehicle that will be crucial in delivering on Sir Paul Callaghan's vision of ensuring that more businesses are able to take their ideas to market. I want to comment on a couple of key clauses. The net benefit clause, I think that was a very positive change. We recognised that we wanted to have a more similar test to the CRIs, so we changed that from net benefit to benefit. As I've said before, we made a key change around the collaboration to ensure that the ATI wouldn't be replicating current and existing funding structures. Another key point that was made throughout a number of submissions was the issue of the research framework and its capability. We were quite clear on this side of the House that we don't think it's appropriate to be legislating for that detail, because things do change in a rapidly changing environment in terms of technology, but also if a country wants to be flexible about where it spends its money and where its economic agenda is, then we don't want to tie up the Institute by being overly prescriptive. Finally, there have been a number of points that have also been mentioned in the Minister's speech around the need not to necessarily prescribe the detail around stakeholders, the Stakeholder Advisory Board, and I think that was the right thing to do, because as has been mentioned in Cabinet circulars, there are a number of provisions around ensuring there is greater geographical representation. So I'm very pleased to support this bill to the House. I think it will be a key vehicle for greater commercialisation, taking more New Zealand businesses' ideas to market. I think it has been a very collaborative process across the House. I think it was under difficult timeframes, but that we mitigated that by ensuring that we wrote to a range of submitters. Very pleasing that only a couple of submissions were opposed, but it is important to note that this is part of our wider government economic agenda, which includes greater investment in science, real policies around infrastructure investment, good policies around labour laws, and that the opposition have raised what I think are very overly prescriptive policies in terms of this bill, and as part of their philosophical vision for New Zealand, which is to tie the country up and oppose everything. But I'm very pleased to support this bill to the House.
Good speech. Good speech.
I call Dr Megan Woods.
Thank you very much, and I am very happy to take a call on this bill and to deal with some of what we have heard in the House this afternoon, because it is simply astounding that members opposite can think that this legislation is going to deliver on the vision of Sir Paul Callaghan is just astounding. This is a woeful piece of legislation that needed strengthening, and it is a missed opportunity. Labor is supporting this legislation. It is supporting it in a very lukewarm way, and we firmly believe that this is an opportunity lost. And we are very disappointed that members opposite have failed to take the opportunity that setting up something like the ATI could have afforded us. I think it speaks volumes that the chair of the select committee that saw this legislation through used 3 or 4 minutes of her speech on this piece of legislation to take low blows and cheap shots instead of addressing the substance and some very real concerns that have been raised in this legislation. Because we on this side of the House are fearful that this is yet another grand scheme from a government that talks big on science and innovation but has failed to deliver a game changer. We're fearful because of their track record. We've got real reason to be fearful here. There is nothing in this legislation that addresses the structural flaws for the manufacturing sector. It is with some irony that we are standing here today discussing and debating a bill that is around more innovation for our high-value manufacturing sector on a day where we've had unemployment figures out that show the manufacturing sector is continuing to bleed jobs. And this is what this bill is about. It is about strengthening this sector, and it is about the creation of high-value jobs and highly skilled jobs, and this bill will fail to do that. There are some worrying echoes of other initiatives that this government have tried. We can just look to the voucher scheme that has been a complete and utter flop. This was talked big in the budget 2010, and there was going to be $20 million over 4 years to high-value manufacturing firms with co-investment of over $100,000. Well, what has happened? It has failed to spend this money because it has no understanding of what is required for innovation in New Zealand. What have we in 2012? Well, less than $4 million has been granted in 2 years, and only 1 in 3 of these have been over $100,000. They've had to expand this into the agri-tech sector, away from just concentrating on the high-value manufacturing sector, and they've had to take the co-funding option down to $30,000. And there are some very worrying parallels with what has happened with the passage of this ATI idea since it was born. So what we had from the chair of the Select Committee, Nikki Kay, was her say that there were some very clear comparisons emerged in the deliberations over this legislation at the Select Committee. Well, I agree completely with her. There were some very clear comparisons that emerged between the government and the opposition side of the table. What emerged from the government side of the table was a failure to understand what 21st innovation looks like in New Zealand and what it will take to truly transform our economy. We've heard a whole lot of hysterical shrieking that we want to look after our union mates by daring to suggest that maybe workers might have some input into innovative processes. I actually want to take you through what Labour suggested in terms of the stakeholder advisory panel. We said it would be really good if we had good industry input into what was happening in the high-value manufacturing sector. We noted that there were very few submissions from industry because of a rushed process, which I will come back to later. But we thought the people who are investing their money, setting up the businesses, we want to have their voice heard. We want them on the stakeholder advisory panel. And we'd quite like the other providers of RS&T and innovation there as well. So the universities, the CRIs, we'd like their voice heard. And then what about the people who actually perform the innovation? What about the people that work as scientists, people that work as technicians, and the people that work in the manufacturing firms on the shop floor and on the lines? These people have got a pretty good idea about what innovation takes and how it is that we can transform this. Because you know what? This is what happens all over the world. If members opposite knew anything about what 21st century innovation looks like and how other countries are doing it and succeeding, they'd get past their hysterical shrieking. We only need to look at one of the most effective lobby groups in science in this country, which is the PSA's Science Committee, which is made up of some of the top scientists in this country. But no, they're members of unions. You certainly couldn't have them inputting into anything. Members opposite need to take off their blinkers and realise what it will take to transform our manufacturing industries in New Zealand. And hearing from everybody with some stake in the ground, some stake in the game, is something that we are fully supportive of. We also thought that it would be a really good idea to ensure there was some regional representation on this stakeholder advisory panel. We thought it would be really good that the areas where the economic development potential resided and existed, it would be really good to have that represented so we could get a broad view of what innovation in this sector in New Zealand might look like. But no, we couldn't have anything like that. And Labour will be putting up a number of amendments that do address these representation issues. We'll be putting up a number of amendments for this bill because actually we want to see this succeed. And what we're really disappointed by is the fact that this government simply doesn't understand what it's going to take. For us, innovation is a means to an end, and it is about good regional and economic development that will create jobs and higher paying jobs. Clearly something that this government doesn't turn its mind to when we look at the employment figures that came out today, that actually jobs don't happen by magic. They take a government that is willing to take an interest and a government that is willing to invest. We think that the ATI could actually afford us such an opportunity, but this is a government that isn't willing to even countenance that we may have a look at that. What we believe is that innovation in New Zealand needs to be an interconnected and joined up process, that we need to have industry, we need to have the science providers, and we need to understand what it takes to commercialise. We have a number of concerns with this bill, not only the representation. We have a worry that the ATI is going to succeed or fail on its ability to be part of this interconnected and joined up group of people. It is going to rise and fall on its ability to be an active player. The way that this government is setting this up is ensuring, it is embedding through this very permissive enabling legislation that it's going to be seen as a competitor to be feared. Members on the government side of the House won't even countenance that we put some protections to make sure that it is seen as an organisation that doesn't unnecessarily replicate and duplicate functions that are already successfully being carried out. They simply wouldn't countenance that we'd put those protections in place, nor would they even agree to the fact that the idea that this organisation, this new organisation, that it being both a funder and a provider might create a little bit of suspicion amongst other people that it's going to have to go out there and form very strong collaborations with. It is its ability to collaborate and its ability to work not only with industry but with other providers that will make this an institute that will succeed or fail. Labor also sees the ATI as something that needs to be part of a wider economic development strategy. Labor thinks that the ATI cannot succeed unless it also has a research and development tax credit sitting alongside it. And we heard from one submitter, in fact one of the few industry submissions that we received from the Manufacturers and Exporters Association, that they saw that the tax credit was a fundamental thing that needed to be addressed for manufacturing to succeed in this country. We also heard from the Manufacturers and Exporters Association that one of the biggest impediments to them being able to innovate, to them being able to hire and them to be able to grow was the volatility of the New Zealand dollar, and that it was about time that we had a government that was willing to address the macroeconomic issues that were undermining the manufacturing sector's ability to get on to succeed in this country. The ATI cannot exist in isolation. I hope members opposite will consider at future readings the amendments that Labor put up, because we want to see this succeed, but we are fearful in its present form that it will not. Thank you.
David Clendon.